They thought they had him figured out. They thought Seth Rollins was exposed, cornered, outplayed. They thought this was a thinking man's war and that they had already won it. But here's the truth that should make you furious if you're a fan of the vision. They underestimated what happens when a mastermind stops whispering and starts firing cannons. Ask yourself this right now and be honest in the comments. How many times has Seth Rollins been counted out, only to burn the entire system down? Because tonight on Monday Night Raw, the illusion shattered. This wasn't a chess move. This wasn't a spy trick. This was a declaration of war. For months, Paul Heyman's vision treated this conflict like a high-level intelligence operation. Information leaks, psychological traps, manipulation layered on manipulation, and Seth Rollins played along. He infiltrated, he anticipated, he countered, through Austin theory, through mind games, through patience. But patience has a limit, and Rollins reached it. Here's the problem no one wanted to admit: brains alone don't stop Braun Breaker. Breaker isn't a plan you outsmart. He's a disaster you survive if you're lucky. Paul Heyman knew that. That's why Braun Breaker was his ultimate insurance policy. A human wrecking ball unleashed with zero remorse. Smash first, ask questions never. And every week, Rollins had an answer for the mind but not for the monster. So let me ask you this: what do you do when strategy isn't enough anymore? You escalate. You don't outthink the enemy, you overpower them. And that's exactly what Seth Rollins did. The arena was already buzzing when Heyman and Breaker stood in the ring, soaking in their own arrogance. Heyman running his mouth, declaring the vision complete, declaring Rollins irrelevant, declaring the war already over. And for a split second, some people believed him. Then the lights went out. Not the dramatic kind, not the playful kind, the kind that makes your stomach drop. A grinding, industrial theme hit the speakers, cold, violent, unfamiliar. No sing-along, no theatrics, just menace. And when Seth Rollins stepped out, everything about him was different. No smiles, no dancing, no games. This wasn't the visionary, this was a general. Every step down that ramp was deliberate. His eyes never left Paul Heyman, and then 2 steps behind him the ground seemed to shake. A mountain of a man emerged from the shadows. Wide shoulders, massive frame, pure intimidation, not a bodyguard, not a backup plan, a weapon. Pause for a second and answer this: when was the last time you felt the power balance shift this hard, this fast? Because Braun Breaker finally had something he's not used to: a physical equal. This wasn't about replacing brains with brawn. This was about adding brawn so devastating that Rollins could finally focus on the real enemy. Not Breaker, not the muscle, Paul Heyman. That's the brilliance of this move. Rollins didn't bring a friend, he brought artillery. A force designed for one purpose: neutralize Braun Breaker and turn Heyman from a mastermind into a sitting target. You could see it on Heyman's face. That wasn't fear, but it was close. It was the realization that the game he was controlling just changed rules. Let me throw another question at you: do you think Heyman has a counter for this, or did Seth Rollins just flip the board entirely? Because this is no longer a covered operation. This is a siege. Every war reaches a point where secrecy dies and destruction takes over. That moment is now. The spy games are finished. The psychological thriller just turned into a full-scale battlefield. And here's what should scare every member of the Vision: Seth Rollins hasn't even made his first move yet. This was just the introduction. Who is this enforcer really? Was this planned from the very beginning? And how long has Rollins been waiting to pull this trigger? Drop your theories in the comments. Who do you think this monster is, and do you believe he can truly stand toe-to-toe with Braun Breaker? Because one thing is clear: the war has entered its most violent phase. The balance of power has been ripped apart, and Raw will never feel the same again. If you want to see how this collision unfolds, if you want every breakdown, every betrayal, every brutal clash, make sure you subscribe to Ring Rumble and hit that notification bell. The siege has begun, and this battlefield is about to burn, because what happened next wasn't just shocking, it was insulting to Paul Heyman's entire philosophy. Heyman has always believed power comes from control, from strings pulled behind the curtain, from monsters he never has to get his own hands dirty for. Braun Breaker was supposed to be the final argument, the period at the end of every sentence, the thing that made people stop asking questions. And now Seth Rollins just introduced a counterweight. Look closely at Rollins' posture in that ring. He didn't rush, he didn't shout, he didn't even acknowledge Braun Breaker at first. That tells you everything. Seth Rollins isn't afraid of the monster anymore because he finally brought one of his own. Ask yourself this and answer honestly in the comments: when was the last time Seth Rollins looked this calm in the middle of chaos? That calm is dangerous. Because while Braun Breaker thrives on instinct and destruction, Rollins thrives on inevitability. And inevitability is terrifying when it finally arrives. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't a last resort. This was a long-term contingency finally activated. Think back. The subtle absences. The quiet weeks. The moments Rollins seemed to fade into the background. That wasn't retreat, that was preparation. While Heyman was busy celebrating dominance, Rollins was building something heavier, something designed not to outmaneuver Braun Breaker but to absorb him. And that's the key difference. Braun Breaker explodes. This new force endures. When the two titans finally locked eyes, the crowd didn't cheer, they held their breath, because deep down, everyone understood what this meant. For the first time since aligning with Heyman, Braun Breaker wasn't the biggest threat in the ring. Let that sink in. How do you think that affects Breaker mentally? Do you believe he's ever been forced to question his own dominance before? Because wars aren't won just with fists, they're won when confidence cracks. And that's where Seth Rollins is most lethal. With Braun Breaker occupied, with his destruction finally checked, Seth Rollins is free to do what he does best, dismantle Paul Heyman piece by piece. No shields, no monsters, no excuses. This is the endgame Seth Rollins has been engineering from the shadows. So here's the question that should keep you watching every single week: what happens when Paul Heyman is forced to fight a war without protection? Because that's exactly where this is heading. The Vision believed they were untouchable, that intelligence alone could conquer anything. But intelligence without force is fragile, and Rollins just proved he understands that better than anyone. This isn't just a new chapter. This is a genre shift. From mind games to massacres, from manipulation to annihilation, and we're only at the opening volley. Tell us in the comments, who do you think walks out of this war standing, Seth Rollins or Paul Heyman? And more importantly, who falls first? Subscribe to Ring Rumble, hit that bell and stay locked in, because the chess match is dead. The siege is here. And here's where it gets even more unsettling, because this wasn't just about tonight. This wasn't just about shocking the crowd or stealing a moment on Raw. This was about rewriting the future of power on Monday nights. Paul Heyman has survived for decades by staying 3 steps ahead. He adapts. He pivots. He replaces pieces on the board when they fail him. But what happens when the board itself is flipped? What happens when the game you mastered no longer exists? That's the position Heyman found himself in when Seth Rollins stood there, silent, unmoving, completely unbothered by Braun Breaker's rage. Rollins didn't need to say a word. His message was clear: your monster doesn't scare me anymore. And that should terrify you if you're aligned with the Vision. Because Braun Breaker has never been about subtlety. He's about domination through momentum. Once he smells fear, he devours it. But what happens when fear is gone? What happens when the man across from you isn't backing up, isn't flinching, isn't blinking? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Does Braun Breaker lose his edge the moment intimidation stops working? That question matters because Seth Rollins understands something Heyman may have overlooked. You don't need to destroy Braun Breaker. You just need to stall him, contain him, occupy him, long enough for Rollins to carve straight through the heart of the Vision. And that's why this enforcer, this walking catastrophe, changes everything. His presence alone fractures the chain of command. For the first time, Heyman can't simply point and unleash chaos. He has to think. He has to adjust. And every second he spends adjusting is another second Seth Rollins is winning. Watch the body language. Rollins angles himself toward Heyman, not Breaker. That's intentional. That's surgical. He's telling the world who the real target has always been. Let me ask you another question. Do you think Seth Rollins has already planned Heyman's escape routes and cut them off? Because this feels less like a confrontation and more like a trap finally snapping shut. And here's what makes it even more dangerous: Seth Rollins isn't acting alone anymore. He's built a structure, a hierarchy, a front line. This isn't rebellion. This is command. Rollins didn't just return to Raw, he returned to lead it. For months, people mocked him, said he was overthinking, said the spy games were unnecessary, said he was running instead of fighting. But now those same people are realizing the truth. Rollins was buying time. Time to assemble the one thing Heyman could never predict: a force that answers brutality with brutality. This is no longer about clever promos or surprise attacks. This is about territory, about dominance, about who controls Raw when the dust finally settles. And you know what makes this even more infuriating for the Vision? They can't undo this. The moment has already happened. The reveal is complete. The escalation is permanent. So think ahead. Think weeks from now. Think pay-per-view. Think chaos. What happens when these two monsters finally collide at full force? What happens when Braun Breaker realizes smashing everything isn't enough anymore? And what happens when Paul Heyman is forced to speak without the comfort of absolute protection? That's the story unfolding right now, and it's only getting more violent from here. This is Seth Rollins at his most dangerous. Not reckless, not desperate, but certain. Certain that every move from this point forward favors him. Certain that the Vision's foundation is cracking. Certain that the war he started will end on his terms. So sound off in the comments. Who wins the inevitable monster vs monster collision? Does Paul Heyman have one last ace up his sleeve? Or has Seth Rollins already checkmated the vision for good? Make sure you're subscribed to Ring Rumble and that notification bell is on, because we're breaking down every stare down, every betrayal, every seismic collision that follows. The war didn't just escalate, it evolved, and Raw will never be the same again.